Hi, welcome back to Soul Speak. Thanks for joining us. In today's episode, we are going to talk about the connection between our physical health and how that does play a role in our emotional mental health and how it affects the rest of our life. We've got a great physician guest speaker that I'm so happy to have here. So thanks for joining us in this episode. I'm so thrilled to have a beautiful inside and out physician with us today. Her name is Dr. Tessa Damm, and she's got a lovely story to tell. And then also how her work has shifted and why it shifted and how that can be of incredible benefit to every one of us that is here listening. So thank you so much for joining us today. I would love to have you introduce yourself with more detail than I did. And if you would start by how you shifted your focus, because I really didn't talk about metabolism and the metabolic function and why that's so important. I'll let you.
Gladly. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, Meg, in this space, albeit virtual, this beautiful space. My story is my background and training is as a physician in intensive care. For those who aren't familiar with that, many are not. That means that I did training in internal medicine and then did 2 separate fellowships, so additional training in critical care medicine and also in neurocritical care. And that enabled me to spend well over a decade just strictly at the bedside of patients who had the privilege of crossing the threshold of the intensive care unit. And that means it's probably been one of the worst days of their lives. So they've had a heart attack that's rendering them in cardiogenic shock. They've actually died and been resuscitated or are trying to die. They had some sort of organ failure, putting them on forms of life support. Those would be common examples of people I care for in the ICU. And in doing so over and over again, well over a decade of just doing that, I started to recognize patterns, as people do in every profession, right? You start to pick up on some nuances and patterns. And that pattern was something that overlapped with what was happening in my personal life, which was watching my own mother deteriorate and die with Alzheimer's dementia. And those kind of presentations, albeit very different in their acuity, share an underpinning of metabolic dysfunction. Having all of those experiences really left me wanting more, because the outcomes that I'm able to provide patients after they've found themselves in the ICU pale in comparison with the outcomes that I'm able to help guide people to if we intervene earlier. And if they identify things that they can do for themselves to potentially avoid ever having to meet me in the intensive care unit.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just summarize that by saying my husband, who's not in medicine at all, used to introduce me as follows. People would say, "Oh, your wife's a doctor. What kind of doctor is she?" And he would say, "The kind you never want to meet." And in many ways, he was right? No one chooses to go to the intensive care unit. So I've changed the trajectory of my career in the last year and a half. I'm now focusing on really striving to help people optimize their health span and, again, avoid needing to meet the doctor that they never want to meet.
Yeah, absolutely. And you use the word health span, and that's not a common word yet. Could you explain what that means?
Most people, in fact, may have never heard the term health span, but I think it's one of the most important words that we should be talking about. So health span means the number of years we live free from chronic disease and disability. And it accounts for not just how long we live, but really how well we live. And so it's common to hear people say, "I want to live a long life." And I believe what they really mean when they're saying that is that I want to live a long, good life, which implies I'm strong, independent, sharp, able to do the things that bring me joy.
Yeah.
And the reason I say it's so important to talk about is there's a problem. And that is there's a gap, and a really big one. So between lifespan and health span. And in fact, in early 2024, the Wall Street Journal published an article on this, and they titled it "The Downside of Living Longer, More Time Spent Sick." And they
Absolutely.
specifically highlighted this gap between health span and lifespan in the US and quantified it. It's nearly 13 years. So this means that most people spend well over a decade in a state of decline, physically, cognitively, emotionally, needing help, losing their independence, and missing out on the life that they've planned so hard for. If you consider this, that the average person retires at age 65, current life expectancy is around 77, that means it's common for people to spend their entire retirement in a body and brain that no longer serves them. And I see you shaking your head. I don't find this acceptable. I imagine most
No.
of your listeners
No.
don't find this acceptable. And that's why, to me, I think HealthSpan is really what we should be talking about. Because how we live not only influences how long we live, but more importantly, the quality of years that we're given.
And I love that. More importantly, the quality of years that we're given. And on this podcast, we really focus on how all of this is interconnected. Now, our emotional health, our physical health, our mental health, our soul health, they're all connected. And I love those two words, health span. You help with beyond the physical component because you've noticed a difference. How does that relate to how we are living our life overall? That word, or those two words rather, health span. Is that the physical component? Is that our daily routine? What have you noticed?
It's complicated, Meg. I guess I'll say what it doesn't mean. I'll start there. Sometimes that's easier because a lot of people see in the media that it requires spending $1 million and like many biohackers, it really doesn't require that. But it does require doing the simple things consistently and with intention. And when I say simple things, for me, that includes eating in a manner that supports proper metabolic function. It includes prioritizing sleep like it's sacred, because it is a restorative powerhouse, and moving your body like your life depends on it, because not only is muscle metabolic currency, but it's also the key to independence as we age. So it's really, in a nutshell, I would say, it's treating your body like the most important investment you have, because it is. And in the vein of, mindset, the saying goes, we all have 1 million problems until we have a health problem. And then we have one.
And then we make time for it.
Right.
Right. That's the backwards way of doing it, but that's really how most people do it. And I love that you said we only have one body, so we should treat it well. In my belief, we have one body. Our soul is here trying to live its fulfillment in this body, which we are meant to treat well because we only have the one soul and the one body. And what we do with our time here is so vital. And I personally don't live perfectly. As I sat down to do the podcast, today was a push and a rush. I tend to love my work and I work a lot. And I've had to pull back on because I've had some health issues. And then you pull back and it's like, pushing myself too hard. So that's a common thing. And yet you've also noticed we sometimes don't push ourselves hard enough. So it's living in that balance. When you are working with the patients you're working with and they're taking care of their physical health or not, how has that been? Is there a connection? Have you noticed a connection or a difference in those patients that also take care of their emotional health? Physical and emotional?
Absolutely. I've been nodding. Like, of course, it seems so obvious, but on a number of levels. So when someone prioritizes their physical health, often they see gains, whether it be in strength, energy, mobility, and this almost always spills over into emotional health. Because as you said, in medicine, we like to box systems as independent. But in life, we have one body, one soul, and everything is interdependent. So as people gain physical health, they tend to feel more confident, resilient, joyful. But what's even more compelling is that science is now confirming what I've observed in my new medical practice, which is that there is a common denominator behind both physical and mental health. And my bias leans where the science is showing, in that a strong piece of that is metabolic health. And that's why I focus on metabolism as the foundation for everything else that matters. My saying is, first get your metabolic health in order, your metabolic house in order, and everything else becomes easier. And metabolic dysfunction is absolutely pervasive, and it's at the root of many of the diseases we fear most. And by that, I specifically mean heart disease, stroke, diabetes, neurodegenerative disease, which includes dementia, and even many cancers. What's less discussed is the way that it also hijacks our mood, our motivation, our mental clarity, and our ability to be present with those that we care about. So a tangible example, because I think you asked, like, what have I seen? So tangible example of the significant overlap between physical and emotional states. Within my current medical practice, I've developed a program for women called Metabolic Transformations. And in it, within this framework, the physical results, which is what I initially focused on, because doctor mindset, those are measurable outcomes. The physical results are impressive. So women lose weight, up to 20 pounds or more on average in just 12 weeks. They have experienced resolution of their joint pains. They have reduction of reliance or even complete elimination of their reliance on prescription medications, including for blood pressure, cholesterol, reflux, migraine headaches. And many who have come through the program with autoimmune disorders experience significant improvement in their symptoms. So that's what I was focused on initially. But when I ask people who've completed the program what they've achieved, like what they perceive to be their greatest accomplishment and what they're most grateful for, it's never the weight, the meds, the lab values. Instead, they say things like, I feel myself again, or I have peace I didn't know I was missing. And the one that gets me every time is, I no longer survive each day. I fully live it.
That's a powerhouse. Those are all powerhouse statements. There's so much I want to say, but I want to jump back to and Dr. Tessa and I have spoken. Her program is titled Weight Loss, correct?
The name of it is Metabolic Transformations, but you're right. It is somewhat marketed and advertised as an avenue for weight loss.
And I bring that up because that tends to be more important to people, or at least something tangible that they can understand. And yet it goes way beyond weight loss, as you said, because the weight is just a byproduct of what's going on within the whole system, within the mind, within the gut, within the emotional state, within living their highest potential or not. And we've all heard by now that serotonin is mostly produced in the gut, and there's a huge connection between the second brain in the gut and our brain in our head. And yet we really don't hear much about the importance of the metabolic function. And I'm so fascinated with that. And there is now more research coming out about that. But I would like it if you would explain that a little more, why that is so vital.
That is a fascinating question, Meg. I'm really glad you asked it. So some of the most promising medical research today is, in fact, in this field. And it reveals something that many people are astounded by and a little bit skeptical of. And that is that people experience dramatic improvements in conditions ranging from bipolar disorder to schizophrenia through merely adopting a low carbohydrate nutritional strategy. And these are some illnesses that historically are very refractory to medical management or pharmacologic agents. Even brain cancer. There was a study published earlier this year. So glioblastoma multiforme, or GBM, a devastating form of brain cancer. In those patients, they have tried, in addition to our traditional therapies, which include surgical resection, chemotherapy, radiation, they split the group in half and had half adopt a low carbohydrate nutritional strategy. And those individuals had staggeringly improved outcomes. We're talking average lifespan of 18 months, and everyone in the diet group, nutritional strategy group, was still alive at 3 years.
Wow.
So really hard to ignore. And I'd be remiss not to mention another obvious, because of my family history is Alzheimer's dementia. So increasingly, Alzheimer's dementia is being referred to as diabetes type 3 because of its strong link to metabolic dysfunction. And if you or anyone listening has ever walked that journey with a loved one, you know how devastating it is.
It's
But
horrible.
there's hope. And that's that we now understand in many ways that this disease may be either delayed or in some cases prevented through nutritional strategy. And again, I understand that many people are a bit skeptical, which is why I'm thrilled that many mainstream medical journals are now publishing these articles. But for any listeners who want to learn more, I recommend there's a website, metabolicmind.org. And it's a nonprofit group that has really done a phenomenal job of laying out research and making it very accessible for individuals who experience or know have a loved one who are experiencing a variety of mental health and physical ailments, and how to approach modifying one's diet to really reap maximum benefits. And so I don't know if that answered your question, but definitely the emerging truth that often we don't really underestimate the fact that our diet can be making us sick physically, emotionally, cognitively.
And to put that in a simple term, if you eat a whole bunch of Doritos or a bag of chips, how much energy do you have after? But truly, because that is not good for your gut. And I'm not saying don't eat those because everybody gets to do what they want. However, and I believe this is my history of learning, our self-esteem is in our third chakra, which is our gut, our upper GI. And that needs to be cleaned out sometimes. And that's also our self-esteem. And our self-esteem is connected to how good our body feels. It's just the way it is. When our body doesn't feel good, it's really hard to have a better self-esteem. Why? Because our energy goes down. And so I subscribe to clean eating, and I don't do it perfect. And I don't think everybody does it perfect. And I don't think that's the point. It's that, can we live with better than not better?
Progress over perfection, Meg.
Yeah.
It's what we do kind of 80% of the time, right? In our day-to-day, not necessarily the perfection that everyone strives for.
Yes. And a cleaner gut helps not only our mind, but it does, like I said, helps our energy level. And then we can do those things, which brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. How do limiting beliefs play a role in health and lifestyle change? Because sometimes we say, oh, I can't do that. That change is too big. I can't give that up. And when we are in a limiting belief system, when our mind is, I call that our mind is too much control and playing tricks on us, what happens? What have you noticed with that? What have you seen?
I think one of the biggest barrier to meaningful change. It's rarely these days a lack of information, although sometimes emerging information like we just talked about, metabolism and mental and cognitive function may be newer to some. But rather than a lack of information, it's usually the beliefs that we carry. And more often than not, it's without even realizing it. I'll be honest, I didn't fully understand this concept of limiting beliefs until I became an entrepreneur. Because that's when I learned a hard truth, which is your business, just like your health, only grows as much as you do. And if you're not working on yourself, you're probably in your own way. So limiting beliefs are tricky for a number of reasons. First, they're invisible. But more importantly, I think, is that they developed because at one point, they likely served us well. But what once helped us survive can then, when we're ready to thrive, serve to hold us back. And I've had many personal examples in my life of this. One would be during what's called postgraduate medical training. So after the 4 years of medical school, then there's internship, residency, and in my case, 2 fellowships. So I lived by the mantra during that time, like, I can sleep when I'm dead. And this belief helped me push through 80-hour work weeks, overnight call, and then the pressures of trying to balance those professional aspirations with some semblance of a personal life. But today, as someone who's more focused on aging well and optimizing my own health span, I know that that same mindset is a liability. And I have to identify that belief amongst others as being outdated and needing an upgrade. So certainly the truth is, to change your life, you most often must first change your mind. And that involves just taking an inventory of the stories you tell yourself and then deciding which ones no longer serve you.
And changing the I have to I choose to.
Oh, the language we use with ourselves is very, very important. I find myself correcting patients frequently. It literally shapes our brain.
Yes.
And rewires cognitive connections. I think you probably know this, but the language we use with ourselves is incredibly powerful.
Yes, it's so much so. And the 10th house in the astrological wheel is our highest potential house. Very hard to feel like we can live to our highest potential, whatever that means, if we feel like I need to and I can't and I should. Those words should be taken out of our vocabulary. I need to, I can't, and I should. Because we can choose to, but it does take the retraining of the brain. And that's, like you said earlier, something every day. And that includes changing our beliefs every day working on that, because it's going to take a bit. And in that, you've mentioned how you've been empowering your patients. Can you explain how you empower your patients? What does that mean?
What that means to me is that I give my patients the tools, the understanding, and the support to take charge of their health. And this is in direct opposition to what most people experience, which is waiting for a diagnosis and or a prescription. So in my years in the ICU, I've seen how our healthcare system handles emergent illness, whether it's trauma, heart attack, all variety of critical illness. And to be honest, we do sick care rather exceptionally well. But this same model often fails a majority of people who may not be in acute crisis, but they're still not thriving. And one of my current patients, when I was kind of onboarding her, described this to me perfectly. She said, I'm not sick enough for anyone to care, but I'm also not well enough to live the life that I want. And that to me captures what so many are experiencing, because they're showing up. They're doing what they've been told are the right things. They're eating better, moving more, trying harder, but they still feel like they're losing ground. And that could be in a number of realms, whether it's their weight is creeping up, they constantly feel exhausted, they just don't feel like themselves anymore. And yet, often they're told when they visit their physician that everything is normal. And people commonly say, yo, my physician told me my labs are within normal limits. And that kind of response, even if it's unintentional, is deeply disempowering. Because it tells people, because your labs don't show disease, your experience isn't real. And it undermines an individual's self-trust, and it teaches people to question their own instincts. And I've learned that this moment when people feel something's right, but their labs are still within normal limit, is precisely the window where transformation is most possible. Because when someone knows and feels something's off, even if medicine hasn't labeled it yet, that's when we have the best chance of preventing disease entirely. And that, to me, is where empowerment begins. So it's helping people recognize that they are the expert in their body. And often change is required. But the other side of that coin is it's not just change from the patient. It's change from the physician or provider as well. So we need time, the education, and the willingness to shift the conversation away from what's wrong in the disease-centric model to what's possible.
You know, when I was raised, our doctors were God. And that's transformed, thank goodness, over time, because doctors are people who are highly educated and important. And yet, as a patient, we are so important, and we are the ones in charge of our health. And so I talk with my clients about making sure you feel empowered in that time you have with your physician, and asking for what you need too, because the learning happens on both sides. It's like when you're in a dysfunctional relationship and you both keep allowing it, it's not going to change. But if one person starts to say, you know what I really need from you, And that then the ball can start rolling. So we are very, very important in our own health plan, always.
Absolutely. That
Yes.
sense of learned helplessness, I think, is too common
Yes.
within our traditional healthcare system. And it really is incumbent upon patients to, educate themselves, but feel empowered to, go into those appointments and act as though you're a partner. Because in all honesty, you're really the captain of your own ship.
Yes.
And minimally, you're a partner in the decisions that are being made.
And when you've worked with people and you brought up that woman that really didn't have, and I told you when we were together last time, my daughter went through the same thing, thought something was wrong. Tessa all came back. I'm like, no, we don't have to go with that. Let's dig further, because when you don't feel well, there's something wrong. And it does then affect our joy, our peace, our happiness. We can only sustain that for a short time because then we're tired. Did you notice that with patients, that connection between those that felt unhealthy and their happiness quotient, their peace quotient?
I'm not sophisticated enough to know how to assess a happiness quotient and a peace quotient, but have I noticed that it impacts their mental space 100% of the time? And the way that I think I've heard them describe it, and I think most people who are not familiar with some of those quotients describe it, is that it occupies a lot of their mental space, because there are so many complex emotions at play, whether it's, again, learning to not trust themselves or feeling shame, or, this cycle of frustration that they think there's something wrong, but they're being told there's nothing wrong. So absolutely, collectively, not only does it invite a sense of learned helplessness, but certainly there are overwhelming emotional characteristics that define that. And it's not common when you actually when I share with people that there is more out there, they should have higher standards, and together we'll get there. It's a pretty emotional conversation that maybe some don't even recognize they're holding.
And that leads me to, I want to bring up a statement that you've said. No one is coming to save you in our medical field and in all of our lives, right? And so when you're saying that we're in a position of partnership, giving your patients, and you do, that empowerment piece, this is for you. You have the tools. No one is coming to save you. What's the reaction when you say that to people?
I don't know, because I've said it a lot in public speaking environments, but I rarely phrase it just like that to one-on-one. So I'm not sure how that sits, because it probably conjures a lot of mental imagery. Goal is to really implore people to take sense of agency over their life and their health. And I think that we too often give too much of that agency to our sick care system. Mm-hmm. And what I mean when I say no one's coming to save you is that the single most important actions we all can take to create the health and life that we deserve absolutely do not happen inside the walls of a doctor's office. Rather, they occur because of our daily decisions, whether it's the food that we eat, the way we move our body, the thoughts we choose to believe. And again, I think you've heard me use this phrase as well, that we've been conditioned to think of ourselves as healthcare consumers. And I hate that. I challenge people instead to kind of step into the role of creator, meaning be the creator of the health, the future, and the freedom that you desire. Yes. Because the hard truth is that heart attack at 50 didn't start at 49. Right? It started decades earlier, likely in your 20s and 30s, and the everyday habits. And similarly, the dementia of onset at age 70 began its silent march probably sometime in your 40s. And just accepting the status quo and, doing the bare minimum, meaning, going for your annual checkups or every other year, really isn't enough. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard if what you want for your future is not, again, that gap that we talked about, that gap between your health span and your lifespan.
And I think that statement's empowering. No one is coming to save you. That rocks to me because it's freeing. It's like, oh, I get to choose my own destiny. That piece of when you are empowering yourself, even if something started when you were 20 or 40, all the changes we can make. And there's so many things we can do. And it doesn't have to be 100% rollover. We don't have to wait to do that. we can say with consistency, I can shift this. That being said, time is an issue for so many people, me included. And so when we begin our shift, and when you are working with patients and you've begun the shift, how much time, and I don't mean like 9 months, when you're asking people, do this every day, how much time does that actually take?
Far less than most people think.
Yeah.
And the truth is that the starting point, at least in my opinion, isn't about adding more to your routine or your plate, so to speak. It's often about changing what's already on it. And that's both literal and figurative when you're speaking in metabolic terms and kind of what we eat. What I mean by that is we all eat and drink every day. So righting the ship of metabolic dysfunction simply starts by modifying those habits rather than creating more work. And when you said, doing little things, I couldn't agree more. And the science backs that. So the biggest return on investment, like if you were to look at a graph regarding whether it's strength training or exercise or, modifying one's nutritional strategy, the biggest return on investment is when you go from doing nothing to doing something. That is the steepest part of the curve, always, across all studies. And so I often reiterate that to those that I have the privilege of working with. And, they say, oh, well, I want to start an exercise routine and I'm going to get in 5 hours this week. And I kind of say, bullshit. Like, why don't you strive for 3 minutes, 3 days this week?
Yes.
Because that's achievable. It's sustainable. And often if we just start something, it becomes contagious and we end up doing a little bit more anyway. But my patients laugh at me because I always say, no. In this case, lower your bar. Start so ridiculously low that it would feel dumb if you didn't do it. That's how you start. So starting points can be a barrier if you set them too high.
And when we say, I'm going to exercise an hour a day or whatever it is, and we really aren't ready or we don't truly have the time yet, what happens is our self-esteem goes down. And once our self-esteem goes down because we're now disappointed that we didn't do it, now our energy goes down and then it becomes a bigger mountain. So important, as Dr. Tessa is saying, we start with minutes. When I just started a different stretch exercise because I was having a pain in my shoulder, I do 5 minutes a day. I don't do 20 minutes a day because I would push it off, but I do 5. 5 is doable. And that helps me feel good about me because I'm taking care of my body. Now my self-esteem goes up. That's how this works. And it's so important to notice those little things build on the next. And then you feel better about yourself. And then you start treating yourself better.
And the language you use with yourself changes. It's all connected. Yeah.
All connected. And so when our mind becomes it's too big of a task. It's too big of a burden. I'll never be able to. I had a friend that died of brain cancer and he was told just to eat anything. And it was a very sad situation. Yeah. And so he just gave up. Because why? Because the mountain was too big. And so when the mountain is too big, our mind takes over and then the stories come. And that's something that Dr. Tessa and I were talking about with data. When we're doing too much research, when we're doing too much thinking. Explain that to us, would you?
Data on its own, I think, honestly means rather little and can be damaging. So information without context in any realm has the potential to cause more harm than good. And we see this in medicine frequently in the advent of electronic medical records of people interpreting their own labs without guidance. So they glance whether the value is red, yellow, or green, and then jump to conclusions about it being good or bad, largely without understanding the bigger picture. And it's difficult to talk about because I don't want to be misunderstood. Transparency in healthcare is essential, and I'm a very big advocate for it. However, if that means handing over raw pathology reports or lab reports before people have the chance to understand what they actually mean within the context of their story, oftentimes causes unnecessary panic, fear, emotional distress, because our minds, as you well know, love to run wild when we don't have a plan. And if we don't completely understand something, we often tell ourselves catastrophic stories that are rarely true, but that's just the way our minds are wired. And far less dramatically, I've seen this play out in that many of the patients that I work with, I arm them with what's called a continuous glucose monitor. So it's a small device that they wear, and they receive real-time feedback to their mobile device about what their glucose is doing. And I'm smiling because even many physicians are now starting to use CGMs to fine-tune their own nutritional strategies. But even physician colleagues of mine end up sending me screenshots of what their glucose monitor is showing them, saying, what the heck is going on? So when using the tool in this way, the data often, the raw data, looks worse before it gets better, especially when reversing years of metabolic dysfunction. And so without expert interpretation and guidance, this leads to confusion, worry, and even often like abandoning a strategy that's actually working. And so all of that to say that data without understanding is what I would term noise. It's only when we add meaning, context, and then framework of a next plausible step that it becomes powerful, less stressful, and in the case of kind of Healthspan, leads to meaningful change.
And we do that, as you said, with the support of the knowledgeable team. Because whenever we are changing something in our life or taking a risk, whether it is a physical change, whether it is really paying attention to my body is not feeling good, or whether it is I really want to learn something new, it's so important to have support and encouragement from the right places. That's really important. Now, before you brought up the American diet, SAD. And of course, SAD as on an emotional level is seasonal affect disorder. And here in the Midwest, that's so prevalent. Can you tell us a little bit more about SAD in regard to the average American diet?
So the standard American diet, which is in the medical literature what we refer to as what the majority of Americans consume, its abbreviation is SAD. And it is exactly that, because it's fueling a national crisis of metabolic dysfunction. So to better explain that, because I've used that phrase a lot, metabolic dysfunction, let me just bring it down to terms that most people are more familiar with. So most people have heard of diabetes. And most people understand that there's a period when one's lab values qualify them as pre-diabetic before they progress and achieve or are diagnosed with diabetes. But what most people don't realize is that there's a period of up to 15 years of metabolic dysfunction when someone's metabolism is not properly working and they're developing insulin resistance for 15 years before they meet the criteria for prediabetes. And it's almost never screened for. But what insulin resistance looks like is fatigue that doesn't make sense, stubborn belly fat that won't budge, skin tags, or that frustrating moment when you realize that I'm doing all the things I used to do that resulted in a little bit of weight loss, but it's not working anymore. And the really sobering fact is that 88% of American adults have some form of metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah,
and
high
again,
number.
Most have no idea. And the really concerning part is that this is what lays the groundwork for the most common diseases of our time. And those are what I've referred to before, and physician and author Peter Attia gave them the moniker the Four Horsemen, which is metabolic disease and diabetes, cardiovascular disease, which includes heart attack and stroke, neurodegenerative disease, which includes dementia, and even many cancers. And then we've also gone on to suggest that many, the new phrase is neurometabolic disorders as opposed to mental health conditions, because there's such a strong link. So staggering and sobering statistics with a glimmer of hope, which is that insulin resistance is reversible. So talking about the other SAD, the seasonal affective disorder that you aptly pointed out is particularly common in the Midwest. Again, metabolic dysfunction doesn't just impact one's waistline. It absolutely shapes mental health. And we went on to talking about earlier some of the conditions where there's now literature to support a low carbohydrate nutritional strategy being even more effective than pharmaceuticals. And the other part is, those commercials on TV with pharmaceutical ads. Again, my husband, who's not in medicine at all, always starts laughing out loud because it doesn't matter what the medication is, but when they're obligated to list the side effects that include death, like suicidal ideation, he's like, what? Who's taking this? Who's going to their doctor's office and saying, I want that? But then contrast that with the side effect. I always tell my patients, you'd best beware. The side effect of optimizing your nutritional strategy may include more energy, decreased reliance on prescription medications, resolution of your joint pains, improved sleep, better mental clarity, improved confidence, right? Like rattle off those side effects.
That's right. That's right. Because it's essential. It is essential. Healthy diet is essential. And there will be a lot of people who will say, well, I don't want to give up all of it. What about that 80-20 rule? I say for mental health and emotional health, there's sometimes that we just want to climb under the blankets, but we just can't do it all the time.
Yep.
maybe one day out of the month or whatever. Same thing. So what does that mean, that 80-20 rule in this situation?
Yeah. Most of us have heard that in a variety of settings. But I definitely am an advocate of the 80-20 rule for lifestyle interventions, meaning really the bulk of our risk factor mitigation occurs with those things that we do every day, rather habitually, and aren't even paying attention to. So that means, whatever it is you're eating for lunch during your workday, maybe think about targeting that. Not so much energy spent on how can I rearrange the important family function with family recipes that means so much to me emotionally, socially. Don't focus on that. Focus on the really low-hanging fruit. And I will tell you, we've spoken of this mind-body connection. And again, going back to use of a continuous glucose monitor, I have found no greater tool to heighten people's awareness than a continuous glucose monitor, because it is giving them real-time feedback in regard to their physiologic response to external stimuli. And that can include food and beverage. It can also include movement, sleep, and emotional stress. And I can talk until I'm blue in the face about, this is going to be, you probably don't realize certain things are affecting you certain ways. And people don't hear it, right? But when they see on their device the immediate impact that is occurring on the inside of their body that's measurable in response to whatever it is, a food that they thought was healthy, the way that they internalize stress from work or interactions, whether it be with a family member or, a coworker, that they pay attention to. Most people go through this phase. The first couple days it's overwhelming, because it's this sense of realization of I have control over how my body responds. And then pretty quickly it turns into this state of empowerment, which really has the same phrase, but with a different tone of, I have control over how my body responds. So it's a tool, but I have found it incredibly powerful in illustrating to individuals just the magnitude of their everyday decisions and actions.
Beautiful. Just like everything. There's so many people that seeing is believing, which is okay. That's okay. That's why this tool is so great. It's okay. On this podcast, I say a lot about the importance of breath work. Breath work is huge. Telling people don't eat when you can hardly breathe. Like, wait till your stomach is at least calm. Throughout the day, take some breaths. Really important for every organ. Do you connect your patients? Do you help them see the importance between breathing, being calm, and how that can affect the parasympathetic system?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an often overlooked tool, I think, in health in general, and certainly health transformation, is really harnessing the activity of our autonomic nervous system, which, as you pointed out, if people are less familiar, one piece of that is the parasympathetic arm, which is so often called rest and digest, and then there's the sympathetic arm, which is often referred to as fight or flight. And in ideal homeostatic conditions, we have a nice balance between the two. They all have their time and place. The incredible part is that our autonomic nervous system can be accessed most directly. There's a physical link in communication known as the vagus nerve. I'm sure you know this, but our vagus nerve connects our brain, our heart, and our gut. And it passes directly through our diaphragm, which is our muscle of respiration and breathing, which is why just a few minutes of intentional breathing can profoundly shift one's nervous system out of stress mode into one that's more consistent with healing. And I found that important, knowing that I didn't have to start meditating for hours. I just had to breathe intentionally. And I took my own advice. I'm going to target 3 to 5 minutes every day, because that I can do that. And to do so intentionally, deeply, and regularly. And I've seen it. Yes, I incorporate it with my patients, and then I've seen it play out real time. And again, seeing is believing for many people. So one of the women that I follow who's wearing a continuous glucose monitor, weeks ago, she had her monitor on and she unexpectedly had to take her spouse to the emergency room. Pretty stressful event. While she was sitting in the waiting room, she noticed her glucose spiked very high, which emotional stress can do that. And we had just talked about the 4-7-8 breathing technique, because it can be implemented very quickly. Essentially, you inhale to the count of 4, hold your breath to 7, and then exhale to the count of 8. And you simply repeat that a total of 4 times. So since that was top of mind for her, she did that because she could feel herself stressed out. And I kid you not, her glucose dropped immediately. And then she was waiting and festering, and it went up again, and it dropped again. And I had messaged her. I was like, what's going on? And she described the situation. And so it really helped cement for her the physiologic benefit. Like, I'm actually doing this to my body. And the other thing that I've found very powerful, in addition to breathing, is just recognizing that events in our world really don't have an emotion attached to them as they naturally occur. They are neither positive nor negative. If we are able to remember that on a frequent basis, that in fact, things that happen are neutral. We are responsible for attaching the emotion.
Yes.
And if we can separate that often is an initial step and stage in realizing that we can then, take a step back, breathe if we need to. But even just that knowledge and awareness, I find myself reminding myself throughout my day, like, no, that's neither positive or negative unless I assign that emotion to it.
Absolutely. And throughout the day, just putting in moments of breath, even if that's when you get in your car to go to the next place, pause for a minute and do the 4-7-8 breathing. It's so vital, and it clears our head too, right? And it connects our head again. And then we might actually take the next step of doing something that's healthy versus not. Well, this has been so much great information and vital for everybody, because this is not out there enough. And thank goodness it is becoming more available, and you're available. So Dr. Tessa is available, and she does a lot of her work virtually. But man, she's really good. Just so you know, she knows what she's doing, and what a blessing for all of us, really. So thank you for being here and sharing your information. And I'm sure she'll be back on. Any final thoughts, comments that you'd like to say?
Thank you so much for having me and sharing this space with me and time. If it hasn't become obvious, this work really lights me up, because obviously it's so much more than, be it pounds lost or lab values improved. It's really about helping people remember who they are and giving people back their autonomy and their confidence and clarity. It's remarkable work, and always drives home the final point, which is when the mind and body are connected, and when you strive to heal one, you can't help but to heal both. And so I'm learning that every day, but thank you for the opportunity to share it to a greater audience.
And everybody, thank you for being here and for sharing and for liking. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Hey, listeners, thank you so much for being part of the Soul Speak world. I really appreciate that. And if you're willing, and if you find this of value, would you please follow on any of the platforms you're listening to, whether that's Apple or Spotify or Google or any of the platforms. And of course, I love the ratings if you find this valuable. You can also follow me on YouTube and like and share. And all of that really makes a difference. Appreciate your participation. And of course, I really appreciate you being part of this world.